Serious, what's the bravest thing you've ever witnessed a child do? I work for a group that provides gifts to life-threateningly terminally ill children. I could tell you 100 stories about these amazing kids. Because that vast majority of them have somehow managed to make something of the shitty hand life has dealt them. However, perhaps the bravest story I have is of a little girl who donated her bone marrow to her older brother with a very rare bone cancer. Her parents didn't pressure her. She wasn't asked. She insisted on being tested and made the decision on her own. She's 7. How many adults would be willing to do what she did? I was amazed to meet her and her brother. Both were incredibly well spoken. Likely from spending most of their lives at the hospital. The brother, who is about 10 now, gave a speech to a room of adults better than most people twice his age could give. Both of them are incredible children. And the world is lucky to have them. When I was 5 or 6ish, me and my cousins were maybe half a block away from my house holding signs up about a garage sale we were having. Some dude in a white van pulls up and offers us all candy. All of us haul us back home screaming and running. But my one cousin, in the ballsiest move 5-year-old me ever saw, snatched a sucker out of this dude's hand and then hauled ass. I thought he was gonna get kidnapped. My nephew has 2 moms and just a kid. He is 5, but since he's the age of 3 he knew the term homophobic. His moms get harasses sometimes for raising him. Sometimes in front of him. But no matter who the person is, my nephew gives them a hug. Doesn't matter how large and scary the person is. My nephew will give them a hug. He tells his parents and his uncles, us, that angry people just need to feel loved again. An end-stage 6-year-old telling his sobbing parents that it was gonna be okay and they'd carry on after he died. That one kept me up for a long ass time. So young and so wise. And then he was just gone. Before my nephew, 7, passed away, his dad and I were talking to him about how when he's better, he could go outside and play and jump on the trampoline. He was so weak but was able to say something along the lines of, "I won't be able to do that. I know. But it's okay." He passed the next day. I didn't witness this. But my son's teacher told us. One kid was bullying another kid who is autistic. My 9-year-old son got up from his desk, crossed the room, yelled at the bully, and forced him to apologize to the autistic kid. My proudest moment as a parent so far. Better than what I did as a kid. Autistic kid was being bullied and I stepped in and shoulder bashed the bully out of the classroom and punched him in the face. Probably best to deal with it without the violence. This isn't going to be as heroic as some of the other stuff on here, but when I was a kid I fell into the deep part of a local river and couldn't swim. My friend, without a moment of hesitation, grabbed onto the root of a tree and got half into the water. Grabbed my arm and pulled me out. Without her I might have died. When my son was 12 he got in between a bully and his victim and started mocking him. He dared the kid to throw a punch and when the kid did he lowered his forehead into the punch. Then he did it again with the same result. I got the call from school before he got home and had all the details. After getting off the bus he went along his normal routine and said nothing. After an hour or so I asked him why he didn't defend himself. I sparred with him regularly and this kid shouldn't have landed the first punch, much less the second. He told me he knew he would get suspended for fighting, so he just took the punches where it would hurt the bully more than him. I have never been prouder of his compassion, courage and intelligence. When I was younger, 16-17, I was working the snack bar at the local pool. 6-7-year-old girl was walking around the pool without floaties or a jacket. Some older kids, 8-9, were running around not paying attention. One kid bumps into her and she goes head first into the water. The kid who bumped her panicked and ran to the lifeguard, while his friend who looked the same age just jumped in. He dove under her and held her above water while swimming towards the shallow end. By that point the lifeguard was in the pool swimming towards them and got her out of the water. She had inhaled some water, so lifeguard proceeds to do CPR. The boy who saved her watched the whole time, and once she spit out the water and started breathing, he went over to his friend and yelled at him for not looking. Then he went back to her to make sure she was okay. Kid got free snacks for the rest of the summer and was honored at the lifeguard station. Now he's a Coast Guard in Southern California. Didn't see it for myself but a while back my sister was at my nephew's baseball game. She usually lets my niece, age 2, and my nephew, age 6, play around behind the dugouts and field next to the baseball field. She said she heard someone shout "look out" after a boy who was practicing batting hit a ball. That's when she turned around and saw my nephew leap to jump on top of my niece to block the ball coming towards her. He took a ball to his back and had a bad bruise for a couple of weeks. My nephew didn't think twice, she said. Must say I was pretty proud of the little fearless dude. My son was stung by a wasp when he was 3 and became very terrified of them. When he was 6 we had another baby. One day I hear my son's horrified scream from the kitchen. Run in and see a wasp banging against the window. He runs to the other room. But as I'm getting a paper towel with which to catch the wasp, my brave little boy sprints back in, picks up his baby sister and sprints back out of the room. He's now 20 and still yells for me and leaves the room rapidly when he sees a wasp. I'm a camp counselor in an area that can get up to 104 degrees in the summer. I once saw a camper realize that a frog had hopped up onto the blacktop basketball court, take a deep breath, and walk across to go rescue it. She wasn't wearing shoes and it was a boiling hot day. But by the time I leaned over to swoop her up, she had rescued the frog and was cradling it in her hands. I put him in a safe place away from campers' feet and I bought her a snow cone. She had such a kind heart. She's fine. Just too old to be my camper now. Not exactly brave as in life-threatening situation. But when my oldest son was 11 months he had a fever and I took him to the hospital for a checkup. They tried to take his temperature with a ear thermometer but he was tired and scared of having something in his ear, so he cried and thrashed around, making it impossible for the nurse to be able to. She asked if we could show him that it was nothing to be afraid of, if she could take my temperature first. I said of course. As she takes the thermometer to my ear, my son stands up in my lap and starts pushing her away. He could barely stand because he was so tired. But he fought tooth and nail to protect me from the thermometer. It took a few tries but eventually I managed to convince him that it was okay, that it didn't hurt or was dangerous. Now he's older and does it himself to the point that I have to hide the thermometer so he doesn't use up the batteries. As a 6'0", 230-pound Marine, trying to hold back the tears from watching my son trying to protect me from what he thought was dangerous, was the hardest thing I have had to do thus far. Didn't witness it but my niece, who is 7, got suspended for beating the shit out of another kid who was pushing a kid around that had those arm cane things. She got a nasty ass shiner but the other kid got a bruised ribcage and a broken tooth. When the principal called my brother he said she has curb stomped another child. Please get here before his parents do, and demand I call the cops or some crazy shit. My brother hightailed it from work and took her for a Happy Meal when he picked her up. When I saw her at Christmas I asked if she remembered beating up that one guy. Kinda jokingly. She looked at me and got a dreamy look in her eye and said yeah. It was great. I'm kinda afraid of her. The house next door to my grandparents was broken into while we were out buying dinner items from a store. At the time my brother, who was only 10 was playing in the living room looking out over the street. He saw a van pull up to the next door house and saw some big men get out of the van. He realized the guys walking up to the next door house were sketchy, asked my grandmother to take a look, the only one home with him, and she decided to call the cops as her neighbors were on vacation that week. Turns out when the guys heard the cops they took off running for their van, but my brother had taken the keys out of the engine while they were in the house. To this day I have no idea where he found the idea and courage to do this. So when the men reached the van they found no keys and just took off running, but were caught quickly. For anyone who might ask, I would assume these guys knew that leaving the keys the engine would make for a quicker escape if needed. Also, my brother is usually quiet when he is playing by himself, and so my grandmother most likely just didn't think he had left the house. was at this ropes course thing where you wear a harness and then climb balance across tight ropes and bridges about 3 or 4 stories up in the air. Harness kept you safe but the height still made me uncomfortable. Watched an 8-year-old full sprint across this super shaky wooden bridge. Bravest motherfucker I've ever seen. Considering I was holding onto my harness for dear life as I inched across. I was about 15 years old and taking my younger siblings and cousins trick-or-treating on Halloween. The youngest were 3 years old, my brother, and my cousin, who were only 4 days apart in age and incredibly close. There was one house where I could tell they had probably gone a little overboard with the scary factor and I tried to convince the kids to skip that one. But they were all very insistent. Sure enough, we get close to the house and it's chaos. Screaming, growling, jump scares, scary masks all in a few seconds. My baby brother is hysterical and I'm trying to get the kids together to get away from this house very quickly, but the other 3-year-old? She's unfazed. She marches right up to the scary masked person near the candy bowl and starts lecturing them, full on finger shaking lecture, for scaring her cousin. 3 years old and she downright shamed them. There were many apologies and much extra candy given before we actually left. Stay in foster care. I'm a child and family therapist who works with a lot of foster kids. And the system is awful. Most kids have to move every 2-3 months because there is a huge shortage of foster homes in my state. They usually get no advance notice. The social worker just shows up, tells the kids to pack their bags, and they're off to another unfamiliar house. A lot of kids in foster care have PTSD or attachment issues, and they're required to establish a new relationship with a caregiver every time they get moved. The fact that these kids are able to deal with all of this while still having to attend school and focus on academics is incredible to me. I've met some really tough, resilient kids. Late to the party, but wanted to add this. This may not appear to be brave to some people, but IMHO it is huge if you stop and think about it. Me and my wife have recently separated after nearly 20 years of marriage. We have 2 children, a girl of 14 and a boy of 12. When we told the children that we were separating, my son, who has only known that house and that routine for his entire life, turned to me and said he was leaving with me. I had nowhere to go. We even slept in my car for the first 2 nights until a friend offered us a spare room. We have since found a house to rent, have moved in and are mostly sorted, still no interweb. But it's coming on Friday. Until then he has been utilizing my hotspot very heavily. Close bracket. To give everything he is familiar with up. To come and sleep in a car and then in a stranger's, to him, house and then to help get settled in a new place at his age is massive and I'm not sure if I could have done the same at 12. He is already a better, stronger man than me. And I am amazed by him every day. I worked at an after-school program and this kid in my program was playing on the monkey bars when he fell. I looked over to see him walking calmly towards me with his elbow bent completely backwards. I tried very hard to stay calm, but was internally flipping out. Running to my binder of emergency contacts and protocols. Trying to reach his mom and control the 10 other kids in my care who wanted to see what was going on. Honestly, he kept it so cool the whole time. We must have waited 20-30 minutes for his mom to show up and take him to the hospital and he didn't cry once. I was shocked. My hands were shaking trying to fill out the accident report and he was so calm and didn't even complain. He had to have surgery to fix his arm and he was back to playing hockey and whatnot before I knew it. Kids are tough AF. When I was 11, I attended my friend's pool party. It was early May in UK so not too warm. The pool was 3 meters x 2 meters. Was 1 meter deep with a sharp slope into 2 meters depth 1-stroke 2-way. As I'm terrified of water and a weak swimmer, I never left the shallow end. Upon realizing how cold the water was, after few minutes I got out. As did everyone else. Except Helen. Slowly it dawned on us she hadn't got out as she was in real trouble. Diana, qualified lifeguard, dived in to rescue her. Only Helen was struggling so much she was pulling her under. So she retreated to save herself. At this point we're all panicking, about 8 young girls. Shivering, some start screaming and yelling help. Poor Helen keeps going under. So Michelle, Diane's sister, another lifeguard jumps in. Again Helen. So scared and desperate was dragging her under and she too retreated. Finally, though petrified, I couldn't watch my friend drown. I jumped in and instead of using the lifeguard method of swimming them back, I sank to the bottom, grabbed her body and walked up that ramp to the shallow end. I nearly didn't make it as the ramp was so slippy, but I managed to grab some traction and save us both. I was shaking more than Helen when we got out as water was and still is my greatest fear. It's the bravest thing I've ever done. Edit. To point out, Diane and Michelle were 11 and 9 years of age. Lifeguard certificates. Very general. But when I worked in radiology, I x-rayed some very sick children and some of them were just amazing at how calm and resilient they were. We fixed a kid with a volvulus using air. It's very unpleasant, uncomfortable, and he was awake the whole time. He held perfectly still. I've seen a toddler with lymphoma, yes. A 2-year-old who handled chest x-rays like a champ despite a sore portacath. A young boy with a massive pleural effusion positioned himself for a decubitus shot, lying on your side, when he could barely breathe and he was in an insane amount of pain, yet he didn't resist or cry out. I actually don't like being around children, but these kids were nothing short of inspiring. Maybe I'll change my mind someday about having kids of my own. Well, it doesn't answer your question, as I was the child in case. But I do not remember it as I was only 2 years old. My family used to live in Mumbai, and there was a large open drain, like the size of a small swimming pool, that was nearly 15 feet deep. I was trying to catch a cat that was running around. The cat jumped over the drain, but I fell in. I did not know how to swim either. I grabbed the edge of the ground at which the drain started and yelled for help, but my mom couldn't hear me because the washing machine was on. She came out 5 minutes later to check on me and was horrified. Again, I was too young to remember, but deaths like these are very common in India. So I think it was brave that I held onto the edge. When I was 8, I was playing hula hoop in my front yard with my neighbor Megan. An old brown Chevy pulled up and tried to lure us over to his passenger side window. He used the cliche, "I have candies, would you like to come for a ride?" Megan and I looked at each other. We both knew something wasn't right about the situation. He started to get out of his car and walk towards me. Megan bolted for the house screaming bloody murder while I stood in a panic. Her mom came out as the guy approached me and confronted him. The guy claimed his excuse was he was making sure that none of the neighbor kids would talk to strangers, and drove off in a hurry. Had Megan not ran to her mom, I might have been a kid on a milk carton. I'm still trying to find her to this day. This was on Chant Street in Fresno, California around 1996. If you're out there, Megan, thank you. When I was in 6th grade, a classmate named Jimmy stood up to a bully twice his size. I didn't appreciate the bravery until far later in life. But the bully had been terrorizing kids on the bus ride home and called Jimmy some mean name or something like that. Jimmy responded with something forgettable, but it was a snappy response. The bully, David, kinda stomped up to him, stood just a few inches away from him. "What did you say, punk?" But not like super menacing like in the movies. He was almost incredulous. Jimmy was probably the only kid smaller than me, and not feisty. Jimmy stood his ground. He swallowed hard, I swear on a stack of Bibles I remember this so clearly. And his voice cracked. But he said, "You heard me." Double quote. He took a beating, but not a bad one. And David didn't really FCK with him after that either. I really didn't appreciate what I'd witnessed until almost 20 years later. But I wish I could have that bravery. Even now. When I was 9, I was friends with a kid named Quincy. He didn't have any friends besides me, and people were really mean to him. One day during lunch, after he got his food, a kid named Andrew, notorious arsehole kid, went and got in his way when he tried coming over to my table to sit down. I got up and got right in Andrew's face and told him to leave Quincy alone. He punched me in the gut. I fell. And I actually thought I was suffocating at first because that was the first I got the wind knocked out of me. Anyway, Andrew and I both went to the office. The principal commended me for standing up to Andrew and I got to go home early because I was still a little shaken by it. My best friend when I was little was a badass. Story. When I was 4 I was swarmed by bees, making me very afraid of them. When I was 10, Renee and I were black raspberry picking. I sat on a log and a swarm of bees angrily came out. I panicked and started screaming, running, and flailing my arms. Renee came running over to me and grabbed my arms, told me to calm down. I look at her and in slow motion, a bee stings her lip, comes out, and stings her lip again. She grabbed the bee with 2 fingers and pinched it to death. I was absolutely amazed. I calmed down and in the end got only 7 stings. She got 10, saving me 11 if you count the double sting. Her lip was the size of a dinner roll. I did not see this but heard the story. A young girl needed a blood transfusion and her brother, I think about 5 years old, was a match for her. So the doctors asked him if he would give her some blood. His parents both said it was the right thing to do. He waited a few moments before agreeing. They hooked him up to do the transfusion and he looked very worried. But that is to be expected. I still hate needles. After a few minutes the young boy asked a doctor, "How long until I die?" The boy thought that giving his blood would kill him and he stepped up to save his sister. That is bravery. This is also a great lesson in making sure people know what you are asking. The boy had no idea that the blood would be replaced and he would be fine. 3. All short. Mine are friends and my little brothers. All happened over 20 years ago. We all grew up to be healthy adults. As a child from ages 7 to 12 choosing to insult and throws objects at a drunken stepfather to divert his attack on your mother, knowing full well that you will be unable to attend school for a few days due to being sick. A teenage boy helping his older abused sister run away from home, then lying to his father to protect her, resulting in the boy being thrown through a window and the father skipping town before the cops show up. A 6-year-old boy telling his biological father "I love you and want to live with you." Not because it's true but because the boy is aware that his father showing up and sneaking his baby brother out of the house into a pickup truck, while no other adult is present, is a kidnapping. The baby won't survive unless he can keep him safe. While not overly brave as there was no real danger, my 5-year-old has definitely charged people who were tickling his brothers as a protective instinct while yelling "Don't touch my brothers." Double quote. Other than that, he also alerted everyone to a scorpion in the kitchen, instructed the youngest to get an adult while he stood guard and kept everyone back, insisting that it was dangerous and to avoid its stinger. He watches a lot of Discovery Channel and animal documentaries. When I was 8 or 9 I saved one of the neighborhood kids from drowning in my pool. He was like 4 and jumped off the diving board with his arms in the air. And when he hit the water his floaties slid off. I guess the adults weren't paying attention and he just sank to the bottom. I jumped in and pulled him out. Didn't think anything of it at the time, but now that I look back it's pretty cool. My brother's been working for my dad since he was a kid. One day when my brother was 12 or 13, my dad had to run some errands somewhere and left another kid who was like 16 or 17 in charge. Somehow, my brother ended up chopping his middle finger off with a woodcutter. The older kid lost it and started hyperventilating when he saw my brother's finger hanging by a thread. But my brother just found a phone and called 911 himself. He ended up in the hospital for a week after they sewed it back on and reattached the nerves. I don't know if he was in shock or what, but he stayed totally calm throughout the whole ordeal. My dad kicked the shit out of me when I was 14. He dragged me down a flight of stairs and threw me into a wall and was just berating me. My younger brother was always slight for his age. Even at 10 he was tiny. He just stood in front of my dad and screamed at him to leave her alone. He was so scared and was crying. But he did it. We both were punished for it. Bravest thing I've ever seen.